Crowlister, the Master Opponent. Hi guys, Crowlister here with some more Namco Arcade content. In this video, I will be doing a tier list. Alright, what's going on? In this video, I will be doing a tier list. Alright, seriously, what's going on, computer? I want to make a tier list video. Let's go. Anyways, tier maker is being a bit laggy on my laptop, and the screen recorder is not exactly helping. I have only a part of the screen record. And then my sticky lamp on the ceiling fell right on top of my keyboard. Alright, seriously, enough with the trauma. I'm busy. Anyway, I'm on Tier Maker, and I wanted to do a tier list for my opinion on Namco Arcade Games, having played a lot of them throughout my life, and more than ever up to here on Arcade Archives, on the Nintendo Switch. This tier list is the best one I could find, Namco Arcade Games, as you'll find it on Tier Maker by somebody. And you can actually add pictures to a tier list you're making at will at the bottom of the list of whatever's in your list you're making. So, I only have part of the screen recorded because I'm trying to avoid including the advertisements on the website, and at the moment there's only one at the very top of the page and one that lingers on the bottom. So, just so you know, I made a few modifications to this tier list before I began. I added an F tier and changed the color of the haven't played, and I reorganized the titles that are in the list to be chronologically and grouped together with their sequels, with the games that I added to the list at the very end of the lineup, and I put all of the games that I haven't played in the haven't played section in advance. Just so you know, though, on this list, those are GB, Bombi, QDQ, Martian Maze, Mop Breakers, the Outfoxies, and, ironically, Mr. Driller. I haven't played those games, and they're not on Arcade Archives as of yet. With the exception of Galaga and Dig Dug Arrangement, all of the games that are in this list are on Arcade Archives, and I have played all of them. So, just a brief rundown. This is going to be my personal opinion on all of these games based on a tier ranking on the computer here. S means I love them, my favorites. A means they're very good. B means they're good. C means they're kinda they could have been better. D means they're not that great. And F is they're garbage. It should be obvious to all that this is my personal opinion only, so if you disagree with any of the games I have in this list, you know, that's you. You're allowed to like and dislike whatever games on this list you want, as long as you respect my opinion, that is. Alright, so, yeah, without further ado, let's get into it, starting with the good old Galaga series. Are you gonna work up and down keys? Alright. First off, we have Galaxian, 1979. Galaxian is known for being one of the first, if not the first, video game ever made to be in full color, and to use parallax screen technology, basically a foreground and a background, with the background being the scrolling stars. It's kind of a rip-off of Space Invaders by Taito, in a way, in that you move a cannon from side to side with one-shot-only encounters with an alien formation. Then the aliens jump out of the formation and charge at you, looping back to the top of the screen, while shooting bullets instead of dropping the formation down row by row as they descend. Galaxian is also credited for its sound effects and its neat color scheme. So it has its in there. And as some of you may know, I'm pretty good at Galaxian. I can legitimately bypass stage 10 in some playthroughs. And heck, I even doubled that in the actual recording that I did before. So check that out if you're interested. So Galaxian, for me, has to be in an A tier because it's a solid choice. I wanted to say solid start, except the first game Namco ever made was actually GB, so it's not really the start there. Galaga. One of the most iconic games that Namco have made besides Pac-Man, and a sequel to Galaxian, Galaga is also really cool. The arcade version of Galaga is great, and I'm not that bad at the game as well. I can usually get to like the 5th challenging stage if I play it legitimately, like I did in my first play of the game on the Galaga and Galaxian My Arcade Pro player that I got recently. So, Galaga's cool. You have a double shot instead of a single shot. You got the dual fighter gimmick with the boss Galaga. It was a massive improvement on Galaxian, as the sequel should be, so, Galaga's gotta go into A as well. I'm not gonna order these in the list categories that I put them in. I'm just gonna slap them on there. So, Gapless. A sequel to Galaga, like Galaga was a sequel to Galaxian. In some countries, Gapless was actually called Galaga 3 for that reason. So, I'm just going by the native name that's used by Namco Museum and Arcade Archives. So, Gapless. Gapless is a bit demanding. It's not nearly as fun as Galaga. The game is a little too difficult. If you progress far enough, the shooting stars and the suicide bullets from the enemies make the game ludicrous, and it's basically Galaga on drugs, if I may paraphrase it. The Phalanx beam, where you basically get the tractor beam to capture enemies to fight alongside you, is a cool concept, as are the other blaster head power-ups. And the dramatic mood music on those certain scenes in the game is a nice touch, so Gapless does have some positives. It's just, the game is very difficult and it's not quite as fun as Galaga, so it definitely has points deducted for that reason. Though still a pretty cool looking game overall, I'd say. I'm gonna put it in C, because it's kind of baseline for me. Not a game I play often. So, yeah. Galaga 88 is going into S. Easily the best game in the Galaga series, in my opinion. Fantastic touch on the Galaga franchise. You have the triple fighter gimmick. You have the galactic dance and challenging stages. You have the dimension warps. One of the stages references Bosconian, which is a really nice touch. You got the Galispark bosses. Or at least I call them Galispark because of Galaga arrangement. Whatever. So, Galaga 88 is a fantastic Galaga game. Easily my favorite of the games in that franchise that I've gotten to play. The only detail about Galaga 88 that kind of gets me a little bit is that while 88 is obviously a reference to the year 1988, the game actually released in 1987. Are they doing that just to heckle us? Even the PC Engine version of the game, Galaga 90, was actually released in 1989. So, whatever, Namco, whatever. Still, I absolutely love Galaga 88. Fantastic game. Navarone. Navarone is one of the more simplistic games compared to what you would normally expect from Namco. It's very simple. You just move a turret around the bottom and sides of a peninsula while shooting off all of the targets. before the turrets on the island destroy you, and you can cancel their bullets with your bullets, though you cannot actually destroy those. And the skull enemy in the middle, if you can hit it while rating its base rotation to get some bonus points. It's an extremely simplistic game with no real special elements, and somebody that got really good at it, like me, could probably play up to round 10 in it and last for quite a while on one credit, so there's not much I need to say about Navarone. It's decent. I enjoy playing it, though, because I can play up to round 10 in it, alright, and it's, it's a little bit different from what you would expect from Namco after having a game like Galaxian, so it's not bad, it's not bad. Now we got the good old Pac-Man series. The original Pac-Man is an A, obviously. Arguably the most iconic game ever made, Pac-Man was a smash hit worldwide ever since its debut in Japan in 1980 with Puck-Man. They later changed the name to Pac-Man because Puck-Man just sounded like a stupid name. And the character sprite in the game was apparently derived from somebody eating a pizza, which is kind of funny. I've always liked eating pizza throughout my childhood. Hasn't most people? So that kind of takes inspiration from such as well. So, yeah. Pretty fun game to play casually. It's kind of hard to last a whole loop in the game, like playing up to round 13 at least, where you can get the key, the final bonus fruit. It's still pretty tough. The animations are iconic. The game itself is super straightforward. If you got really good at the game, you could probably last a while on it and possibly get to the end of the loop glitch that we all know where the screen glitches up. Well, I'm not going to play that far legitimately, or even with buffering, because it's going to take a lot of endurance for me to do that. It's still a nice little flashback. Super Pac-Man, for me, is actually going to go into S. I love Super Pac-Man. While it is an easier game in the Pac-Man arcade lineup, it is a very fun game and a very nice touch. You control Pac-Man around the maze, eating the keys to open the doors so you can get the food items that lie within them. Then, in addition to the traditional power pellets, you got the super pellets, which turn Pac-Man to Super Pac-Man. The gigantic size of the character that he becomes is apparently supposed to be flying, which is why he's immune to the ghosts. And I guess super strength to break the doors open without the keys. You also got the super speed, which if you use wisely and really memorize where the door opening patterns in every stage is, you could really do well in the game and legitimately do a loop clear after round 16. So, I really enjoy Super Pac-Man. It's a great fun Pac-Man game. Really is. Definitely my favorite of the arcade Pac-Mans. Apart from any more home console games like Pac-Man Arrangement, PlayStation Portable, or Pac-Man World. The arcade games. Pac and Pal. Again, Pac and Pal is a pretty interesting take on what they would do for a Pac-Man sequel. I think it was made on the same engine as Super Pac-Man, and the game is quite different. There's this green character named Miru that runs around the stage and will take the fruit targets and take them into the ghost house to help you clear stages faster. Though if you get all of the targets in the stage yourself, you get more points. So, kind of a help and a pest simultaneously. Then instead of power pellets, there are items that give Pac-Man an energy beam that he can use to momentarily stun the ghosts, which is a nice touch. If you got really good at the game, you would know that the tunnel scene in the middle, you can go up the upper valve and move up and down it to avoid the ghosts easier. If you knew that, you could probably last a while in the game, so... Pac and Pal is a solid title. I'd say it's worthy of a B for me. Pac-Land. Alright, this is going to be a bit of a hot take. Pac-Land is overrated. It is sensible that they would make a Pac-Man game that was inspired by the Hanna-Barbera cartoon show that they aired back in the day. And Pac-Land also has its point in being probably one of the first, if not the first, of platform games, and is apparently written to have been what had inspired the idea of the NES epic Super Mario Bros. I am aware that Shigeru Miyamoto loves Pac-Man, and that Pac-Man inspired some of his work, so, pretty cool touch. What I have against Pac-Land, though, is that the controls in this game are very weird. Having to press a button to move forward and double tap to sprint. And you have to run fast enough to jump high enough to dodge certain hazards. And the springboard jumps to cross the lakes are a nuisance at best, in my opinion. And not a single in-game tips, like the Namco Museum 4 or Pac-Man Museum Plus, says that you have to spam the move forward button to cross the spring jumps to cross the lakes. Which is a vital tip you need to know to actually progress in the game. So, some of them even require precision. And the game's... it's tougher than they make it look like it is. It really is. It is interesting in that it has a lot of secrets, so there's that, I guess. So, it's not all bad, it's just, it's not my favorite game by Namco. Definitely not my favorite Pac-Man game. Like I said, though, it's alright. Pac-Mania. Pac-Mania is also a nightmare to play, in my opinion. Having a three-dimensional Pac-Man game where Pac-Man has the ability to jump is neat and all. It's just, the game is a lot more difficult than the other earlier Pac-Man games because the wraparound and the limited screen containment of the maze without the ability to zoom out makes it difficult to see where the ghosts are, and the ghosts can corner you very easily. Especially in stages where you have a lot of funkies and spunkies. You can jump over the green funky ghosts, depending on where you jump to them, though it can be tough under pressure. And the gray spunky ghosts jump about as much as Pac-Man himself does, so you cannot jump over her. And the stage layouts are also pretty easy to miss Pac dots in if you're not clearing out like entire block formations around the wall segments. So, in the later loops of the game, it's absolutely ludicrous, and I cannot play this game well whatsoever. So I'd say Pac-Mania is probably my least favorite arcade Pac-Man game. Though I'm still gonna put it in C because, it's Pac-Man. It's still decent. Anyway. Tank Battalion. First entry in its series. Tank Battalion is a game where you operate a tank and use it to destroy the other tanks before they destroy you, and more importantly, your headquarters. You have a headquarters scene at the bottom of the screen, and if that gets destroyed, you lose all your lives. So, you have to protect that with your life in the game. Some of the stages have brick walls that you can shoot through, which can open vulnerability to the enemies, while also putting you under the risk of you and your headquarters getting more vulnerable as well. One detail that I didn't mention in the Tank Battalion long play is that you get more points for destroying the tanks based on your distance to them and if you're facing them. So if you destroy a tank from far away, you get more points, basically. And more points if they're facing you, because of the risk of getting shot yourself. Very simplistic game, as a game released around the day that Pac-Man goes, so it's not that special. Really. There we go. Tank Force. the third entry in the Tank Battalion series. The second was Battle City, which was actually a non-COTS game on the NES and Famicom. If I had to rank Battle City, though, it would go into the higher tiers, because it's an improvement on Tank Battalion. And Tank Force is an improvement on it even more. It's probably my favorite game of the games that are in Namco Museum on the Nintendo Switch, despite being one of the ones I had no knowledge about before I played that compilation. There are a lot of quality of life improvements in both Battle City and Tank Force that make the game very fun. It's really not that difficult. You can probably survive a while on it if you're good at it. And if the power-up RNG is nice to you as well. And Tank Force is a fun, cool game. It's got bosses, it's got a lot of Easter eggs, like hidden Pac-Man and Dig Dug sprites. It's a neat game overall. Very good. I actually want to put this in S. It's just I have to use the up and down keys to scroll on this site on my laptop, and it's lagging like crazy, so. Yeah, I love Tank Force. Tank Force is a great game. King and Balloon. King and Balloon is kind of a spin-off of Galaxian. It was made on the same engine and has a lot of the same sound effects and some of the same mechanics. You move a cannon from side to side and shoot at invaders to destroy them and clear a stage. Except you have unlimited cannons and you lose a stock if the king at the bottom of the screen gets abducted. Once the balloons hit the bottom of the screen, they'll wait for the king to walk into them and then they'll abduct him. And if you shoot them quick enough, the king will be saved. And if he gets taken away off the top of the screen, you lose a stock. Very interesting make on the game, though the limited space you have, it's a tighter space you have in between your cannon and the aliens, and the fact that they can shoot you while they're in the formation does make the game more difficult than Galaxian, so it's definitely the inferior game in my opinion for that reason, though still a very interesting idea to spin the game off nonetheless. Rally X Original. I've played Rally X Original before New Rally X because of Revenge of Arcade on the computer. I had that before I had Namco Museum Volume 1, so I played Rally X Original first. You know, Rally X is a more unique game in the series of Namco Arcade Games. You drive a race car around a maze course and have to collect 10 flags while avoiding aggressive red cars that move faster than you and randomly place rocks, which destroy you. And you have a way of defending yourself by using the smoke screen, which will temporarily stun the enemy cars. Then, you know, the special flag has been iconic throughout Namco Arcade ever since Rally X, and challenging stages are always a nice touch. It's just, there is no reason at all why you should prefer Rally X over New Rally X. New Rally X has always been the vastly superior game, and I think some of us might agree with that. While it is a lot easier than Rally X, it's also more fair. In Rally X Original, some of the mazes are a bit trolly with dead ends, there are more enemies, and your fuel depletes faster. Whereas in New Rally X, the game is a bit more balanced and legitimate, I'd say, to be able to do a loop clear at round 16. So, I always thought New Rally X was fun. It's not just the music and the design of the cars. New Rally X is better than Rally X Original all the way. So, I'm definitely playing New Rally X in A, and Rally X Original, I'd say, would be a C. Warp and Warp. Another one of those more simplistic games compared to what you would expect by Namco of any arcade company. Warp and Warp is just a game where you move a character around the playfield and shoot these creatures with their tongues sticking out. You get more points for destroying them the closer they are to the center. And if you enter the portal while the Warp and Warp sign is active, you go into a different scene where you drop bombs in a somewhat Bomberman-like field to destroy them instead, where it's actually a bit more difficult to do so. The game is actually pretty boring, and it's not that easy to play up to round 10 in it compared to Galaxian and Navarone. And it's really not that great of a game. It's not special at all. So, compared to what Namco could have done with their games, they could have done so much better with this. So, that game's going into D for that reason. Bosconian. Another neat space-style shoot-'em-up game. Bosconian is a game where you fly a ship around a wraparound space field with a radar system somewhat like that of the Rally X games that shows you the locations of all the bases, and you as well. And you destroy bases by shooting them through the core while they're open, or by shooting off their 6 cannons. Your ship can shoot bullets forward and backward simultaneously, which is super useful. You can get enemies that are on your tail while you're running. And the game is really fun, especially the new version. Namco Museum Volume 1 had the old version of Bosconian. Later compilations like the Plug and Play and Namco Museum Virtual Arcade have the new version. Arcade Archives has both. I definitely prefer the new version because the enemies are a bit more aggressive in the old version. At least I feel like they are. And the game is really good to play casually. Fantastic game. I think a lot of us would agree Bosconian is deserving of a solid A. Yeah. Next up, we got the Dig Dug games, besides Mr. Driller, which I didn't play yet. If it ever comes to Arcade Archives, though, I definitely will. Although they do actually have a Mr. Driller game on the Switch, I think. Whatever. Anyways, the original Dig Dug is a definitely unique and neat touch on an arcade game. You got this character that digs underground to fight against monsters that invade his garden. You got the Pukas and the Figars, which are iconic. Then, you stab them with a harpoon and pump them into inflating like a balloon until they burst, which is a funny way to attack enemies. You can also drop boulders on them, and if you drop more than one boulder, you get the veggie target, which can get you some bonus points. Very simplistic game, though very fun simultaneously, even if I'm not that good at it myself. So, the characters, the music that plays while you're walking, the game's definitely deserving of its iconic status. For me, I'd say it's a B. And then we have its sequel, released in 1985. For whatever reason, my long play of Dig Dug's sequel is now my most viewed video. It started off slow, then after I set my end screen to show the best for viewer instead of my most recent upload, that video started skyrocketing in views compared to my others, exceeding 500 in views, and now it's my most viewed video. Which begs the question, how? Instead of being underground, Dig Dug is on a cliff island with the enemies and has a drill that he uses to attack Stokes on the island and crumble the smaller section of it to sink enemies into the water, which is very interesting, trying to make the game a bit more unique compared to the original predecessor. So, it's an interesting touch, I will say. I do like how the game has an old version and a new version where the difficulty and the layout of the stage differs depending on the version, like Bosconian. So, it's a solid game. I like it, actually. It's good. It's good. I did play it a lot on Namco Museum DS, so... yeah. as soon as the lag stops. There we go. Now we have the pole position games. Pole Position is a three-dimensional racing game Namco made based on Formula One, which is a realistic racing Grand Prix event in Japan. Fuji Speedway is also based on a race course in real life in Japan, as the original layout map shows in the game. They changed it a little bit in Namco Museum Volume 1, though, and Volume 3, possibly to avoid licensing issues with Namco Circuit instead. And even the Arcade Archives version of the Pole Position games changed the advertisements on the billboards to advertise Namco's arcade games instead of real-life products for licensing issues reasons. So, you start with a qualifying lap, and if you finish fast enough, you do the actual race, where by default you do 4 laps, though you can actually do 3 if you use the dip switches. And in the later laps, the enemy cars get aggressive with their placement and lane changing, and it can be very difficult to actually survive a whole race. Though if you can do it, especially on command, it is a good bragging right. So, Pole Position was iconic while it lasted. Then, a year later, it got this sequel where, they updated the car like New Rally X did to look nicer. You have 4 courses instead of only 1. Suzuka is also based on one in real life. And then you have the test course for beginners and Seaside, which is basically for master players. I struggle on Seaside completely. And if you compare a race on Fuji Speedway compared to the original Pole Position, the game is significantly harder. The car moves a bit faster. It's harder to steer compared to Pole Position 1. Puddles slow you down a lot more and are placed in places on Fuji where they're harder to avoid. And the cars change lanes more frequently. So it's definitely more difficult. It's just the better graphics and having more places to race on compared to the original is what makes people prefer it to Pole Position 1. Plus, there are also options in Arcade Archives that make the game a little bit easier, so that's forgiving for that reason as well. So even though I'm not good at the game whatsoever, I do think it's about on par with the original Pole Position, with what I think about it. Xevious. Most people pronounce it as Xevious. Whatever. It's a shoot-'em-up set in a faraway world shrouded in mystery that has a connection with the wonders of the world, like the bird geoglyph that actually appears in the game. You fly a ship called the Solvalo, and use it to attack enemies in the air with the zapper and on the ground with the blaster. The game is said to get more aggressive the more aggressively you play. As you survive on 1 credit, the aerial enemies will become more aggressive and send its harder versions after you. The longer you survive on 1 stock, basically. There are the Zolbaks, which will decrease the air level if you destroy them. Some of the enemies in Xevious are pretty iconic, like the indestructible Bakaras and the Andor Genesis. You got the Soul Citadels hidden throughout each stage, which are a good bragging right if you can memorize where all of them are. And then, of course, you have the special flags, which, if you know where those can possibly appear, and if you manage to find one in a playthrough, it's a good bragging right as well. You can get an extra life if you fly over those. So, while Xevious is not that hard, especially if you play with dip switches, the game can be a little tedious to try to loop clear because of the Bragg Zagatos and the Garo Zagatos that automatically appear in the later stages, out to 16 in total. So, Xevious is definitely a cool concept, though. Very interesting game by Namco in the shoot-'em-up department. And I've been familiar with it for a while thanks to Revenge of Arcade on the computer ages ago. So Xevious is a pretty solid title, I'd say. Put it in the A tier. Alright, Mappy. That game's going into S. Mappy is easily one of the most deserving games of being called one of Namco's most iconic non-Pac-Man titles. It's a cat and mouse chase game about a police mouse that's storming a evil cat's mansion to recover items that they stole. And while Mappy clearly has a nightstick in his hand, his only means of protection is to use the doors to slam them onto the Meowkies. And he can use the doors, even if he's not directly up at them, to slam them onto the Meowkies at will, which is hilarious. Then you got the pulse doors, which send a microwave that send them out in clusters, just to get you some extra points as well. Then you got Goro, or Namco in the original Japanese version of the game, that runs from side to side and hides behind objects, and gets you some bonus points if you pick up an item he's hiding behind, and the multiplier that you get for picking up the same item in succession. You know, it's a very simple game. The music is catchy, you got the challenging stages, which I can get perfects on all 4 of them. The later mansions have the bells and the pitfalls, which are a nice touch. The game's not that hard if you get good at it. And I cannot see what's not to love about Mappy. It's a fantastic game with adorable characters. Definitely recommended among more casual Namco Arcade fans that are looking into playing more of their games than just Pac-Man or Galaga. Yeah, Mappy is fantastic. And then we have Hopping Mappy, which was released in 1986 as one of the sequels it got. The one it got in the arcade specifically. The other one, Mappy Land, was actually on the NES and Famicom. So, Hopping Mappy is where you control Mappy around the playfield on a pogo stick. The Meowkies bounce back and forth within a row or column instead of chasing you. And you have to memorize where they hop in order to beat every stage as you collect all the stolen lawn items. Some of the later stages require you to make an input cancel in order to dodge the Meowkies, which gives the game some difficulty. The music is catchy and Hopping Mappy as well. The challenging stages are pretty straightforward. Hopping Mappy is a pretty enjoyable game as well, I'd say, so I'm playing that in the A tier as well. Well, I'm playing it in the A tier. Mappy was an S. So, yeah. Phozon. A game that a lot of people only know because of Namco Museum Volume 3, which was the best-selling Namco Museum on the Sony PlayStation. Phozon is a very unique game by Namco. It's a puzzle game where you control an item called a chemic around the playfield to connect Moleks and form a shape as shown in the middle of the arena. And if you complete the shape exactly to scale, you progress to the next round. There are 3 stages in a world, as the game calls it, followed by a challenging stage. And the further you go, some of the shapes get more and more complex. And the more Moleks you attach to the chemic at once, you obviously limit your movement space around the arena, making you more susceptible to running into the atomic, which will try to destroy the chemic. The whole atomic formation moves in an orbit. It doesn't chase you. Then after a bit it'll split, and the individual particles of the atomic have different personalities. The red ones will continue to orbit, the green ones will actually try to chase and catch you, the blue ones split. You know, and that can make later rounds of the game especially difficult. Your shape also resets to what it was before if you lose a stock, with the only grace period you get being that the atomic appears more slowly. The game is entertaining at first, though if you're trying to play up to World 8, it gets extremely tedious. And the atomic shows no mercy at all. So it's really not that fun for that reason. There's also World 7, where it makes you build an inappropriate image. An extremely inappropriate image that I will not talk about on YouTube. Which is why I skipped that stage in the long play. They censored it in Namco Museum Volume 3, just so you know. Some of you may know what I'm talking about. And it just so happens that I'm good at the game's challenging stages. So yeah, Phozon's not that great of a game. It's alright, it's just not great. And it's definitely not a game I care to play up to a whole loop clear ever again. The third form of World 8 is extremely difficult. And then you repeat that world over and over again for the later worlds after that until you lose your last stock. So what's the point? So yeah, it's an overlooked game, and it deserves to be overlooked. Through and through. So, Libble Rabble. Though I have heard of Libble Rabble before, for a while, I haven't gotten to play the game until Arcade Archive, since it wasn't in any compilation. Libble Rabble is another more unique game. You control these tiny dwarves named Libble and Rabble that have a cable connecting each other, and you close areas of the playfield among posts to harvest little mushrooms, while avoiding the enemies that appear of sorts. The stages in Libble Rabble have a treasure chest hidden in them, which, if you reveal, can reveal Bashishi fairies. And if you catch all of the different colors of them within a set number of stages, you activate a miracle, which will take you to a bonus round. There is a problem I have with Libble Rabble, and that's that the game requires co-op play. You have to control Libble and Rabble simultaneously if you're playing solo, which is very difficult to coordinate, and that really messed me up trying to play the game. Even at the point where I started to get better at it myself. So, Libble Rabble's not that fun for that reason, though still better than some of the other games I'm going to talk about around here, so. Libble Rabble's alright, it's just the fact that it requires co-op is what deducts points from it severely. The Tower of Druaga. There are some people that love this game, and there are some people that despise it. The Tower of Druaga is a action kind of role-playing game where Gil, the Golden Knight, is climbing to the top of the tower to rescue the maiden Kai after being kidnapped by Druaga, along with the blue crystal rod item, which is basically the source of Gil's kingdom's power. In addition to finding the key to open the door and making your way to the top of the tower, you also have to find treasure chests, which only appear after a certain condition in each floor, except for just a couple. And the treasure chests contain various items, and most of them are required in order to actually beat the game. Though I did play Tower of Druaga a little bit in Namco Museum Volume 3 back in the day, I didn't really get intimate about the game until Namco Museum DS, which actually has a game guide telling you how to find the chests on every floor in the game that you can view while you're playing. And Namco Museum on the Nintendo Switch does that as well. So, that definitely made the game winnable. Along with the fact that there's also a continue option hidden in the game if you really wanted to beat the game, and if you were a casual, that wasn't that good. You basically have to do some research to know how to find the treasure chests in every floor in the game, and then you might be able to appreciate Tower Druaga a little bit more. I do think it's a good bragging right if you can actually beat the game legitimately, so it's just occasionally the starting point, which is randomly decided for every playthrough, can screw you up, especially on floors with will-o-wisps where you haven't gotten the necessary ring for them yet. And the magicians, especially wizards, are no fun to deal with. So, though I do find the Tower of Druaga to be an enjoyable game, it's definitely not worthy of being in the upper tiers for those reasons. It's pretty good, though. I like it anyway. And then we have its sequel, The Return of Ishtar. The Return of Ishtar is a direct follow-up to the Tower of Druaga in that Gil had just defeated Druaga and revived Kai at the top of the tower, and all they had to do from there was return from the tower. And the death of Druaga has caused the tower to warp and become even more dangerous than before. So Kai has to take the blue crystal rod with her and use it to protect both herself and Gil as they fight their way through the enemies and work their way out the tower. Like Libble Rabble, The Return of Ishtar was specifically meant to require co-op, so if you want to play the game solo, you have to coordinate using Kai and Gil simultaneously. At least in some stages. In others, you can just use Kai and use Call Gil as soon as you get to the door. And the game is extremely difficult to understand. You basically have to do trial and error to know exactly what kinds of spells to use on the enemies and how to really beat each room in the game. And really do some hardcore note-taking on the connection of the rooms. Luckily, Arcade Archives' Return of Ishtar has a game guide showing you the room mapping and gives you some tips on what you can do to survive each room. Then, you have limited magic power, and after your magic power gets weak, you can no longer use some of the later spells. It's basically impossible to beat this game on 1 credit. You have to play the game a bunch and use the passwords to kind of bank your progression on Gil's vitality grow and Kai's magic power grow in order to really be able to beat the game. And the game's really not that fun. I do like that the Tower of Druaga got a sequel. It's just... It seems to me like the creators of the game didn't really know how to do the sequel without botching it entirely. I understand why The Return of Ishtar would become one of my more viewed videos now in my Namco Arcade playlist. It's not a fun game to play at all. There are just some details in it that are cool, and the game itself is just, how do I do this, you know? So, that's why The Return of Ishtar goes into the D tier. Garobda FOD. I can't explain enough that Garobda is the worst arcade game by Namco. Definitely of the ones I've gotten to play. What you may or may not know is that Garobda is a spin-off of Xevious. They randomly thought the Garobda tank from Xevious should have its own game, so they made one. And you control the Garobda tank around an arena and use a rapid-fire laser turret to destroy enemy tanks in the playfield. And you have a shield that you can use to deflect bullets. And while that might sound cool at first, the game itself is ludicrous. In the later stages, you have to deal with hyper tanks that have a shield that you have to whittle away before you can destroy them and attack more aggressively, as well as flossers that dodge your attacks and make it a nightmare to land a hit on them. And some of the later stages even have a fortress that does not give you a chance to survive. And while that might not sound like such a big deal to some casual players, in this game, the enemies reset after you lose a stock. So you can't make any checkpoints throughout a certain stage you're struggling in. You just have to completely obliterate the whole stage there and then in order to make progression in it. And the game turns into bullet hell very quickly. especially if you're not quick enough to destroy the enemies in certain stages. And I legitimately cannot beat the game, even if I pause buffer. So, it's the most unfair game ever by Namco that I've ever gotten to play so far. I think maybe Kaite Takura Sagashi might be the only game that might be considerably more unfair than it. And even then, I didn't play that game, or plan to play it. So, yeah, Grobda, definitely worthy of a spot in the garbage. Rightfully. Dragon Buster. I'm not much of a fan of this game as well, to be honest. Dragon Buster is a game that I can understand why people would like, because it's this game about a prince that's going out to save a princess from a dragon. You know, a lot of people like that kind of lore. It's just the game itself can get pretty annoying to play through as well. Like, you have this roadmap that you get to choose which specific dungeon of a few that you want to go in. And if you look closely, you can determine what the best route could possibly be. Then as you go through the dungeon, you have to come into these rooms where you fight these bosses, until you find the one that has the door to let you proceed to the next area. And the bosses are extremely annoying as well. Fafnils can blow fire continually and promise you'll take damage. Skeletons are very hard to counterattack. Wizards are just ridiculous. And bishops can give you a headache if you're not familiar with how to do the thrust and stab attacks. And the dragons at the end of each stage are also no pushover. So, the non-boss enemies are also a nuisance. They can toss and turn you all over the place. And the double jumping, how jumping in the game is in general, is also very weird. And it's just not a fun game at all, in my opinion. While there are some redeeming qualities about Dragon Buster that save it a little bit, it's definitely not my favorite arcade game by Namco. So, it's going into the D tier. Forgive me. Metrocross. Metrocross is a more unique arcade game by Namco about a runner that's basically running for his life. All you do is you sprint to the finish while jumping on springboards to help you move faster, and stomping cans and drinking energy drinks to move faster, skateboards, lots of different items going on, while dodging an array of different obstacles that slow you down severely as you try to make it to the end. Then, your performance will affect your performance potential in the 4th stage of 8 worlds, where, they're basically a survival test for the character. The character that you use in Metrocross looks like an Animorph, though he's not. He's a human that just has a really big chin. Concept art for the game and the cutscenes in Namco Museum Volume 5 kind of make that clear, just so you know. Metrocross is a game that requires hardcore memorization in order to do well in it. Like, memorization better than what I can usually do. So, you really have to play the game a lot in order to really get good at it at all. And the later stages kind of make it hard to do so, because they can toss and turn your character all over the place. So, while Metrocross is a unique concept and a pretty decent idea for a Namco arcade game to be more unique, compare your packs and your Galagas and your digs, it's also a kind of mediocre game for me, so, C. Yeah. Baraduke, also known as Alien Sector. Baraduke, released in 1985, is a game about divers going to a planet, a marine planet from what it looks like, to help the native race of aliens that live there called Packets from the invasion of evil creatures called Octies. You have to destroy the blue Octi characters to progress to the next stage. They will usually leave behind capsules that could have a bag on to attack you, some gold for bonus points, a packet which you can hold on to for a roulette at the end of the stage for a chance of gaining or losing a shield, or if you're really lucky, a wave gun upgrade. Then if you get a wave gun upgrade, you have to be really careful about it because you lose it as soon as you take damage. There are 8 worlds in the game in total with 6 stages. The 5th stage is an armory, and the 6th stage is a boss. The final boss can be extremely difficult to beat, to figure out how to beat. So, you basically have to really do some research and watch people play the game to understand that you have to go inside its mouth and shoot it from the inside. And doing that can be very hard because of its 3-way shot that it has. Though I really like Baraduke for its concept, it's a really fun game. I played it a lot on Namco Museum Virtual Arcade before Arcade Archives. Great game. I like it a lot. I'd say it's worthy of an A. Fantastic. Bakutatsu Keijutei, its sequel, is a different story, though. This was one of my more recent long plays by Namco on my YouTube channel, because this game's really not that great compared to Baraduke. It's a lot harder. You have left to right scrolling only. It's like a more generic side-scrolling game. It's also a lot more difficult because the enemies can corner you easily, and bringing home a full pack of Alive and Well packets in this game is virtually impossible because of the bullets that can clutter up from the Octis in it. And basically, you just have to make your way to the end of the scroll in each stage in order to progress. It is a nice touch that you have a rider machine for your character, and that you can get some for your packets to have an extra shot as they orbit you. And there are obstacles that seem indestructible that are not actually. There are some cool points. What kind of turns me off about Bakutatsu Keijutei as well is that the game seems to be an incomplete game. The high score system is ineffective in the game, at least in Arcade Archives, and the demo sequence just has your character stay idle the entire sequence until the spurred enemy kills him. So I have a feeling that Bakutatsu Keijutei might have been a rush game for that reason, and that turns me off a little bit as well. So even though I am glad that Baraduke got a sequel, it's really not that great, and it could have been much better in my opinion. Somebody left a comment on my long play for Bakutatsu Keijutei, basically saying that the way that the packets scream as they die sounds like a cat. And yeah, I can hear that. So, Motos. I've been familiar with Motos longer than probably most of you people have, because of that computer compilation I mentioned earlier, Revenge of Arcade. Motos was like the obscure game in that compilation, and to tell you the truth, I really liked playing that game, even if I wasn't good at it back in the day. I love the concept of the game, how you're basically in bumper cars in outer space and bashing up insects, having to make good use of the power-ups that you're privileged with in some of the stages. You gotta be quick with the shooting stars. I like the whole space bashing the bugs off concept. I really loved that as a kid for some reason. Then I would later play the game on Virtual Arcade and then Arcade Archives. It was the second arcade game by Namco that I bought for Arcade Archives on my Switch, excluding the Namco Museum games. The first was Dragon Spirit. I just had to buy what I was able to really conveniently afford back then. Now I have every single Namco arcade game that's currently on Arcade Archives internationally. And yeah, with the pause buffering that you can do in Arcade Archives, I was able to see the entire game. And being able to beat the game in one way or another was kind of a magical moment for me. At last, I could see what the whole game was like. I kind of feel like Motos was made on the same engine as Grobda because of the startup screen and the credits are very similar. Except Motos is actually a bit more fair than Grobda if you know where to use the power-ups, since the enemies do not respawn in Motos if you lose a stock like they do in Grobda. So it's a bit more forgiving for that reason, and in my opinion, the vastly superior game. And yeah. Motos has been more nostalgic to me than most other people in the world. And to tell you the truth, I'm going to put this game in S. I also really love Pac Motos and Pac-Man Museum Plus, originally Namco Museum Remix on the Wii. So, yeah. Sky Kid. A game about birds flying in airplanes. Really. In Sky Kid, you control this bird called the Red Baron in a red biplane with a machine gun and the ability to do loops to dodge attacks. And you're supposed to pick up bombs and use them to destroy targets at some point throughout the stage. And while destroying the target is not necessarily required in order to progress, it does reflect in your high score on the leaderboard at the end of the game. So try to get those if you possibly can. The game's loaded with hidden secrets of different sorts, some of which are kind of funny. The game is very hard, though. It's not that replayable. Some of the later stages get ridiculous, especially if you're trying to destroy all the targets that they assign. So, the game does lose points for me for that reason. And while I do think the game is a good concept, it's not that fun compared to the other games by Namco that I play more often. So, for Sky Kid, I'd say it's a C. It's not my favorite, really. Toy Pop. A game that most people only know because of Namco Museum Volume 1. It was the really obscure game that was included in that compilation. And it hasn't been in any other compilation ever since, apart from the Arcade Archives lineup. So, Toy Pop is a game where you have this puppet named Pino and this girl named Acha that are invading a castle, a witch's castle, to save their friends that have been kidnapped and are being mind-controlled by a wizard. You fight your way through boxes, as the game calls them, as you open gift boxes to reveal certain weapons to use against the enemies and other useful items, while you try to find the 4 hearts hidden within bottles to open the door and progress to the next stage. I forgot to mention, Sky Kid was also the first arcade game by Namco, I believe, to have the option of co-op play, where you can have another player called Blue Max fight alongside you if you wanted. So Toy Pop would have to be, like the third game to have the option to co-op by Namco, with the second being Sky Kid Deluxe. You cannot play as one character or the other at will. You have to use Pino if you're playing solo, which is alright because Acha is actually slower than Pino. So, the secondary characters in these games usually have a weakness compared to the primary character, regardless. While Toy Pop is a very interesting concept, it does have some gimmicks and difficulty that take away from it, in my opinion. The game's really tough to beat legitimately, especially if you're trying to avoid damage or stock loss. And the game also requires you to look at your score and to be really good at math in order to play it at the best extent, since your score determines your power-ups that you get in a specific way in each stage, and the order that the apples fall in the bonus boxes. So, the game's a bit complicated for that reason, and there are also some stages that are literally impossible to get a nice work bonus in unless you play co-op. Because there are a few stages in the game that have balloons, which are a nuisance in the game, by the way, as an enemy, and not a one box in the entire stage has pins. So, those stages really set me off for that reason as well. So, even though Toy Pop is a more unique game with some cute points, and a lot of people find humor that you lose your clothes if you take a hit in the game's still not very fair at an extent for some reasons, and there are some unnecessary gimmicks in it that make it a little complicated to fully understand. So it definitely loses points for those reasons, along with how long the game is to play through in general. So, having to change your weapons to fight each of the enemies is also annoying. So, I'd say a C would be fitting for that game. Thunder Scepter. Thunder Scepter is a three-dimensional driving game where you operate a spacecraft with just enough energy to make it to the ending gate, while blasting enemies that come your way. And you have to get through each stage fast enough to make it to the end. While you have unlimited lives for your ship, it's game over if the power meter depletes completely. Kind of like pole position at an extent. And the ship is designed so that it has just enough power to make it to the end if you have few problems with the enemies. Then you have to destroy the satellites around the battleships before you can destroy them, and they'll slow you down until you do. And there are also indestructible asteroids, which can cause a headache as well. So, that does give the game some immense difficulty. Thunder Scepter is also a very fast-paced game because it only has 4 stages, and then the game's over. So, it is an interesting concept, though. It can be pretty fun to play casually. Arcade Archives does have an option to make the game easier with the power meter decrease, with the cost being you can't register your score on the online leaderboard. So, I still think Thunder Scepter's a cool game, though. It's fun. And then its sequel that it got less than half a year later. The game really is 3D also. The original arcade cabinet was. And if you buy the Arcade Archives game on the PlayStation 4, you can play 3D in it with PlayStation VR. Of course, you can't do that in the Switch version. No Nintendo Labo scope. Oh well. The sequel to Thunder Scepter is harder, a lot harder, than the original. There are 6 stages instead of 4, and they have elements that weren't in the original Thunder Scepter. You got Baccaras from Xevious that can get in your way. Some stages require you to use the Smart Bomb in order to destroy an obstacle to progress in them. There are eruptions on the floor that can destroy you easily if you're not careful. There are turbo lanes in some of the stages that are pretty cool. There are some cool new features and some annoying features, both added in the 3D sequel that got in. Because of how harder the game is, it is a game that I'm not really acquainted with playing casually often. So, I do think it's a nice touch, though. It is cool to know that 3DS-like technology existed since the late 80s. And yeah, I do overall like Thunder Scepter. B's pretty deserving, I'd say. The Genji and the Heike clans, also known as Genpei Tomaden. This is an interesting one for sure. Based on a Japanese folktale, the Genji and the Heike clans is about a samurai named Kagekyo that perished under the captivity of the Genji clan. He was a member of the Heike clan. And then he came back as a demonic warrior from Hell after the King of Heaven asked for the Old Lady of Hell to bring back one member of the Heike clan to fight against a demon named Yoritomo. So Kigekio rises from the underworld and goes out on an adventure throughout Japan to find 3 sacred treasures that he could use to fight against this demon. The game plays in 3 different perspectives for different stages. The platformer mode is pretty neat. There is a bit of a problem, though, that Kigekio does not move along with moving platforms, which can make some of the stages involved pretty difficult. And if you fall into a pit or water, you go to Umi, where you confront this, Enma is his name, that has a 1 in 8 chance of sparing your life. And so you have to be really careful in those stages. The boss scene perspectives, where you have to fight those same bosses over and over again throughout the game, can be very difficult to get through, especially with the flaming arrows and the wrecking balls. And it's very, very easy to take damage throughout the game. You also have the sword level, where your sword decreases in power if you strike solid objects, and can only be increased by finding rare purple gems. And that adds to the difficulty even more. I do think the Genji and the Heike clans is more playable, by my skill at least, than some other difficult arcade games by Namco. Because at least I can survive long enough with the maximum candle increase to your health at the end of each stage. And I understand what you need to do in the game to beat it. The biggest problem that I tend to have with it is the triple dragon you have to fight to get the sword of Kusanagi. That dragon can destroy you easily if you're not familiar with its movement pattern, and if you keep touching its heads over and over. And the glitch where you can skip the battle and still get the sword doesn't always work. So, once you get the sword of Kusanagi, though, the game becomes pretty enjoyable. I do think this game is a cool concept. I like what it's based on. It's interesting to have games with cultural references. So, more good to the bad, I'd say. This game is pretty neat. If only I ever got a proper chance to play its PC Engine sequel, Samurai Ghost. Oh well. Rolling Thunder. Probably the most iconic 1986 game by Namco. It's a game about an organization called Rolling Thunder that sends out its spy named Albatross to attack an evil organization named Geldra that had kidnapped his girlfriend, Leela. Albatross goes up against a bunch of armed and dangerous grunts with his own handgun as he fights his way to confront Mabu. That's the name of Geldra's leader in Rolling Thunder 1. So that he can rescue Leela. You have to make use of doors that have ammo, as well as machine gun weaponry, to use against the enemies, and use your shots wisely, because you have a limited supply before you become more vulnerable. You can dodge some enemies in some scenes by jumping high. Some of the grunts have their own guns and grenades and can be hard to avoid. There are also these demons that can really screw you up if you're not quick to shoot them. You know. I'd say the first story of Rolling Thunder is about moderately difficult. Then the other story after that is more demanding. There are some techniques in the game that do make it a little bit easier. Like, there's a glitch where if you back away from an arms door enough and come back to it, you can use the arms door again and again. Some people might do that to take advantage of machine gun ammo to make the game a little bit easier. There's also a bit of an easier way to defeat Mabu at the end by doing high jumps at the very sides of the screen to help make him a little easier. So, you know, I do think Rolling Thunder is a neat arcade game by Namco, the original arcade version. It's pretty fun. It's pretty solid, I'd say. Now, where its sequel is concerned, this game is demandingly difficult. I do like that Rolling Thunder got a sequel. I also like how Leela is actually the primary character and Albatross is the secondary character. So, the game takes place in Miami, Florida, and then Egypt for the second half. They're going after Geldra again after they caused some commotion with satellites in space, and they follow Geldra's new leader, Gimdo, to Egypt, which is where the second half of the game takes place. And while I do think Rolling Thunder did deserve a sequel, this game, its sequel, is a lot more difficult. To the extent that I struggle in it, I mean. Like, I can't feel myself to beat the final stage properly, because you pretty much run out of ammo no matter what you do before you get to Gimdo. At least that's his name in the Sega Genesis version. I'm not sure if it's the same in the arcade version. And then you're pretty much done for. So, that's why I've only done just a few playthroughs of this game ever. And I haven't played it quite as often, or enjoy it as much. So, you're going in to see for that reason. I have heard that the Sega Genesis version of it is better, and it has more bosses and more secrets, so hopefully I'll get the chance to play it one day if it should ever come to the NSO app, if and only if. Wonder Momo. Wonder Momo is a beat-em-up and the first game by Namco from 1987. There's this girl named Momo that's in a live show acting as a superhero attacking Waramon demons. You basically kick the demons as they appear. There are also machines that can attack you in different ways. Then Momo has this gimmick where she can spiral around to become the superhero with Wonder Momo, which gives her a temporary power and endurance boost based on a power meter you build up by attacking enemies while not in Wonder Mode, which is a very interesting, unique concept compared to those of other Namco Arcade games. The game is very difficult, though. Enemies can spawn over top you very easily and stop if you just miss them with your attack, which can really mess you up. So, it's very difficult to beat all 16 stages for that reason. There's also the random NSFW, kind of, on the stage curtain on some of the stages. Then again, it is a very Japanese anime game, so what would you expect? So, while Wonder Momo is a cool concept, and I do like that it has a female protagonist, the game is a bit demanding and not one that I play often. So I got put in C for that reason. Scratchy. Yokai Dochuki. This game used to be an F for me. First playing it, I completely struggled and had no idea what was doing, and of course I got the hell ending. From there, though, I did a little bit more research about the game and understood it a lot better, so at least I know what I have to do in the game in order to get to heaven, or even if I wanted to do any of the other endings in the game. Yokai Dochuki is a game about a boy named Tarosuke that died and went to hell, and is fighting his way through the underworld for a chance of having a better fate in the end. So you control Tarosuke around with a charging shot, and the way that the game allows you to attack is very weird. The projectile bullet is very difficult to aim right among enemies, especially if you're using the charge shot. You cannot auto-fire if you're in the water, like on the water surface, which is super weird. Enemies spawn over top you or directly in front of you easily if you're not careful. You really have to have real memorization in order to actually beat this game, with any ending at all. And the final stage, where you have to make it to Buddha without destroying any enemies or taking any money, is absolutely ridiculous. Especially the last part where you have to climb the clouds. I hate that part of the game a lot. So, you know, Yokai Tochuki is definitely not a very fun game. And even though I'm not a huge hater of the game now compared to what I would have been back then, it's still worthy of a spot in the D tier for me. The only real good point about it is that it's fast-paced. So, yeah. Dragon Spirits. Now I can relax a little. Dragon Spirit is a shoot 'em up about a dragon. More specifically, a prince that turns himself into a dragon with a magical sword in order to save the princess. You know, Amur uses a sword passed down from a legend that defeated the demon Zarwell by turning himself into a dragon. And then that voice calls for Prince Amur to turn himself into the blue dragon to fight Zarwell the demon after he was resurrected and kidnapped the Princess Alicia. Which is what goes on in the opening cutscene for the game. Then, Dragon Spirit, you basically control the blue dragon in a manner somewhat like Xevious, in that you have 8 directional movement and both a ground attack and an air attack for certain respective enemies. You know, there are different power-ups throughout the game, and the game actually punishes you for being overly greedy about power-ups. A double-headed dragon is statistically better than a triple-headed dragon because of space cluttering and auto-fire abilities. Third-degree fire is inferior to second-degree fire because of limitations you get as well. The game punishes you if you're greedy, basically, which is very funny. It's got cool bosses. It's got fantastic music. I can't blame Super Smash Bros. Ultimate for including a remix of Dragon Spirit's Stage 1 theme. And the credits music for Dragon Spirit is one of the most beautiful pieces of music I've ever heard in any game I've ever played. So, the game is also pretty forgiving. It's not that hard. People can legitimately one credit clear it. So, you know, if you're patient enough to get good at Dragon Spirit, it becomes a game that's definitely one of Namco's more replayable ones, and one of their best in my opinion. So, while this game hasn't gotten a lot of attention compared to my other Namco Arcade long plays, I'm definitely playing this game in the S tier. And you know, it's a game about a dragon, and I love dragons. See? Alright. Now we got Dragon Saber, its sequel. Dragon Saber is definitely not as good as Dragon Spirit is. I think a lot of us can agree on that. While it is cool that Dragon Spirit did get a sequel, they made it unnecessarily difficult in comparison. You do have multiple hit points like you do in Dragon Spirit and Dragon Saber. It's just defaulted off. So, without dip switches, you take one hit, you die. Unlike with Dragon Spirit. They also removed some easy tactics that the original game's new version had. And the enemies are a bit ridiculous to go up against in Dragon Saber as well. I can't always beat the first stage without taking a hit. And stage 6 in the game, the Ice Cave, is absolutely ridiculous. I absolutely hate that part of the game. You know, stage 9 is also not pleasant to play through. And while Zawell from Dragon Spirit is a bit of a pushover for a final boss, Dragon Saber actually has a difficult final boss that actually has a ranking system and can absolutely destroy you easily without giving you a chance unless you really know how to play the game as a technical player and what element you are to use to come up against him. Like Dragon Spirit, I do really like Dragon Saber's music. The Stage 4 theme is probably my favorite song in Dragon Saber. And then, of course, you have the Easter egg where you can alter the music by holding ground and air attacks simultaneously as you start the game up to alter the music to be like Dragon Spirits with remixes. And they even extend the credits to include an updated Namco Chronicle at the end if you manage to beat the game with the Ultra BGM, which is a fantastic Easter egg. So Dragon Saber does have some good points. Again, though, it's nowhere near as good as Dragon Spirit, so I'm going to put it in C. It's a bit demanding, and I can understand why people would hate Dragon Saber so much. Ordyne. Ordyne is one of the more overlooked arcade games by Namco, in my opinion. It's another shoot-'em-up game. It's a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up that appears to take some inspiration from other games like Fantasy Zone and Gradius. You know what I'm talking about if you play the game for yourself. So, in Ordyne, there's this scientist named Dr. Tamari that invents a device called the Ordyne that, along with his girlfriend, gets stolen by the mastermind Kubota. And Tamari and his assistant go out on a dogfight to save the Ordyne and the girlfriend Kana from Kubota's clutches. In Namco Museum Volume 4, the assistant's name is Felix. In Arcade Archives, the character's name is Chin. I'm not sure maybe if they changed the character's name because it was a girl with a boy's name. And the character himself looks pretty freaky as well. I can understand why they would change it in some of the box arts for the PC Engine version of the game. So, the aircraft that Tamari and the assistant ride in have a straight shot and a bomb shot to take enemies downward diagonally. By defeating tougher enemies or enemy formations, you're given these crystals, which you save to use at the in-store with Miyuki-chan, or the lottery place with Dream Company Limited, to get speed-ups or different weapons. And the different weapons work like Fantasy Zone. You can only use them for so long before they expire, so you have to use them wisely. The game's not that hard, it's pretty easy. You could logically one-credit clear it if you got good at it. It just takes memorization among the 7 stages and what to really do against the bosses, and you can do it, so, you know. I like Ordyne's music, I like the characters, the designs of the enemies. The game's really fun. I really like this game, to tell you the truth. I actually want to put Ordyne in S. It's a very overlooked game that, in my opinion, should have gotten more attention. So, yeah. I really like Ordyne. That was like the game from Namco Museum Volume 4, as I watched the game on YouTube, that I was kind of interested in seeing the whole game. So I'm very glad that I got a chance to play it with Arcade Archives. Yeah. Metal Hawk. I like Metal Hawk a lot more than I thought I would. Metal Hawk is a warfare game where you drive a helicopter to destroy enemy bases by bombing their campsites and shooting air enemies. It's a pretty fast-paced game. You're just given a bunch of different missions where you bomb campsites with your ground attack, with your air-to-ground attack. You have to earn a certain amount of points in order to beat each stage, which doesn't sound as tough, which isn't as tough as it really sounds. If you play with customizable options, you can make the game pretty easy as well. What you need to be careful about with Metal Hawk is that you have to master the ascent and descent feature where you make your helicopter fly higher or lower. Because while flying high obviously helps you to avoid certain enemy attacks, you have to be low enough in order to move faster. You have to be low enough in order to reach, not move faster. Because while flying high obviously allows you to see more of the stage, you have to be low enough to actually land hits with a bomb attack and actually make progression in the stage. So, yeah. I do find enjoyment in playing Metal Hawk casually. It's really not that bad of a game at all. I enjoy Metal Hawk. It's definitely at least a B for me, I'd say. Yeah. Splatterhouse. Of all the arcade games by Namco, the god of arcade games in my opinion, Splatterhouse is the one that's definitely the most graphic, not for kids. I mean, just look at the logo, it's bloody. So, Splatterhouse is about a guy named Rick that goes into a house that's being corrupted by evil forces and has a mask that's guiding him as he fights his way through the house to destroy the evil within. And his wife, Jennifer, becomes a casualty in the process. So it's definitely a dark, gruesome game. The game is also very bloody and gory, with the way the enemies are destroyed in it, with different weapons and stuff. It has some disturbing images. It's not that colorful arcade game that people are used to seeing as kids. And I like that. It's a nice abstraction from what you would expect by Namco after having games like all the ones I just talked about thus far. Splatterhouse would get some sequels on the Sega Genesis by Namco, as well as a prequel on the NES with Splatterhouse 1 Pocket Graffiti, which it pretty much deserved. Yeah. I do like Splatterhouse a lot, actually. I'm putting this game an A. If you get good at if you play Splatterhouse enough, you can get pretty good at it also. It's not that hard. So, Philios. Philios is another shoot-'em-up game. It's about a hero riding on a Pegasus that has a sword that shoots beams and uses that as a shoot-'em-up. You can charge the beam up to make it more damaging for single-shot attacks on enemies. Philios is very difficult to beat legitimately. It has one of the hardest final bosses you'll ever fight in any video game, seriously. I mean, unless I use an auto-fire key for fully charged shots, I cannot beat the final boss legitimately in the hard mode. Perhaps that's why the game has an easy mode that you can optionally play instead. That's my personal guess. They probably realized how hard the final boss was and was like, oh crap, we gotta put in an easy mode so people can be actually willing to try to beat the game. There are some pretty cool temporary power-ups in the game. The game can punish you for greediness about the options. So, you basically gotta play the game a lot and memorize it, like a lot of others. And I do like the concept of Philios a lot, and the message of love that it has between him and Arthemius in the cutscenes in between stages and at the end of the game. So, I do like Philios as a concept a lot, so I'll put it in B. If it was a bit more fair, I might like it more. Rompers. Alright, this is another hot take. This game is also overrated. Rompers is becoming one of my more viewed videos in my Namco Arcade playlist. And I can see why. I can see why people would like this game. It's a somewhat humorous game about this country boy named Chap that's going through a bunch of mazes to try and rescue Rutima, whatever her name is, from an imp. Stages are cleared by picking up all the keys. You have to dodge the enemies or push walls down onto them. And while the game seems pretty simplistic and fun to play at first, it's kind of like Fozon in that it gets really tedious the further you get in it. The spider stages are no fun. Some of the later stages require you to wait a certain enemy respawn after destroying enemies with the walls to appear in a certain place to progress. Stage 60 is just absolutely ridiculous. It has a hard final boss. And like Garobda, it also has the problem in that the keys reset if you lose a life. So you can't make any checkpoints within a single stage of the game. That can make the game extraordinarily difficult to do a full playthrough of, even with pause buffering. So I'll tell you this, I did not have fun recording that video. So I'm glad some of you people actually paid attention to it, compared to some of my other videos. And I hope some of you will not be that offended after seeing me put this game into the D tier. I do like the humorous elements in the game. It's got some funny cutscenes. It's just, the game is a little ludicrous to play through. So it's definitely not my favorite. The Legend of Valkyrie, or Valkyrie no Densetsu. This was supposed to be the star game of Namco Museum Volume 5 on the PlayStation, though I've only played it on the Nintendo Switch with Arcade Archives. The predecessor to this game on the Famicom, The Adventure of Valkyrie, its arcade version is also on Arcade Archives. I just haven't bought that yet. I said I had all the arcade games, not the NES and Famicom ports. So I haven't played The Adventure of Valkyrie nor Star Luster yet, to be clear. So yeah. Legend of Valkyrie is an action-adventure game about a goddess named Valkyrie that goes to Earth to fight against a demon force that threatens to take over the Earth. You can play co-op in the game with the secondary player controlling a green guy named Sandra that has a more limited base attack with a trident and lobbing shots. The Legend of Valkyrie is a pretty fun game. It does take memorization, about the same amount of memorization as it does Ordyne, and that goes for the shops as well. In both Ordyne and The Legend of Valkyrie, the items and pricings for the items that you can buy from the merchants are not altered in between playthroughs. So the same spot will always give you the same items and the same pricing. So you can make a shopping plan and use it to really turn the game into your favor. You can get different weapons that are temporary use with your shots to help you play the game, There are 8 stages in total. There are only a few stages that can be a bit of a headache. Other than that, though, the game's really fun. And yeah. Maybe if I took the patience to understand it, if I watched it in other people's videos, I might try out The Adventure of Valkyrie. Which is why it says 1986 in the game's dates, with The Legend of Valkyrie being 1989. So, at some point I'll probably try out The Adventure of Valkyrie as well. So, until then, I'm going to put The Legend of Valkyrie up here in the A tier. Pretty good game in my opinion. Burning Force. Another pretty unique shooter game by Namco. It's about this girl named Hiromi that's going through a graduation test to become a space pilot. She fights on this combat hover cycle that's going through different obstacle courses with enemies to shoot them and destroy bosses, followed by a actual pilot phase where you go up against a tougher boss in 5 different days, as the game calls them, followed by a final stage against the tough UFO-like boss at the end. There's also a secret in the second stage of day 3 with the spinners and with the star station spinners, where if you spin them fast enough, you can go into an alternate world where the game becomes tougher, and Hiromi will get a tiara instead of a beret at the end if you beat the game. Which is a pretty nice touch. Burning Force is a cool game. I do like it. It's definitely another A in my opinion. So, yeah. Burning Force is a cool game. I like that one. Cosmo Gang the Video. The best way to describe Cosmo Gang the Video for me would be a cartoonish version of Galaga. I mean, that's basically what it is. You weave a ship from side to side while shooting hordes of aliens that go into a formation while jumping at you and shooting bullets as they do so. There are some challenging stages that are like a shooting gallery kind of deal, where you shoot the aliens before they take any of your fuel cells away. Some of the later ones can be annoying to do solo. It has co-op optionally. It's got a cool final boss, though a tough one at that. It's got some power-ups that can turn the fight into your favor if you're lucky. Cosmo Gang the Puzzle... Yeah. Cosmo Gang the Video is a cool shoot-'em-up game. If you like Galaga, I'm sure you'll like Cosmo Gang the Video as well, because the game's very similar. It's just a more cartoonish version of Galaga, so, yeah. Definitely an A for me. Cosmo Gang the Puzzle, which is the game that literally inspired Pack Attack. Cosmo Gang the Puzzle is kind of like a Tetris-like game that Namco made, with the Cosmo Gang characters, where you rotate pieces in one direction to line up rows of fuel cells to create rows to erase them, and crystal balls to knock out the Cosmo Gang aliens. It also has a multiplayer battle mode where you can go up against a rival and attack Cosmo Gang on your playfield to flood the other playfield with your own. You know, it's a pretty nice game. Like I said, this is the game that Pack Attack is literally based on. More specifically, Pack Attack is based on the SNES port of Cosmo Gang the Puzzle by Namco. You know what's funny? I left a comment on Hamster Corporation's video for the English trailer for Cosmo Gang the Puzzle, where it was first coming to Arcade Archives, saying about Pack Attack and that it'll be interesting to play the original version of the game on the Switch. One person replied to that comment saying, just wait for the SNES version of the game to come to the NSO app. I refuted that, of course, because I thought that would be a kind of obscure choice of a Namco game to come to the SNES app. And surely enough, more recently, the SNES version of Cosmo Gang the Puzzle came to that respective NSO app, and is playable on it now. So, what are you gonna do? I mean, at least the arcade version has the music in a better key, in my opinion, and the background changes, which it doesn't in the SNES version. Though the SNES version does have that puzzle mode that Pack Attack also has, so, you know. I like playing Cosmo Gang the Puzzle casually. I can progress pretty far on it on the normal difficulty. So I'd say Cosmo Gang the Puzzle is a solid B for me. Newman Athletics. Another game that I like a lot more than I thought I would. Newman Athletics is a sports game. It's kind of like Track and Field by Konami, except it has superhumans. Humans with superpowers. Which is an interesting touch. There are 8 unique sporting events, many of which require you to alternate button pressing rapidly as fast as you can to progress. Some of the games are tough, some of them are easy. It's a pretty nice mixture of superhuman-based sports events. Pretty good to play if you want a game that doesn't take you that long to play through, and if you're coordinated enough. And I like Newman Athletics. It's a pretty decent game. I'd say it'd be a B. Mott Breakers is a sequel to Newman Athletics, I am aware. So once that game comes to Arcade Archives, if it does, I'll check it out as well. Tinkle Pits. Tinkle Pit is a game about a kid named Pit that takes a Tinkerball with him to attack enemies after his town gets corrupted by a demonic force. This game also has the option to co-op play with Pit's sister as the secondary player. And you use the Tinkerball to set a trap that you let enemies walk into and release it to attack them. You can also pick up and throw balls to damage them as well. What's cool about Tinkle Pit is that the game references several other characters and items from other arcade games by Namco that came out before it. Like, you got the toy soldier enemies, which are flat out from Toy Pop, and Pukas and Figars, which are more obviously from Dig Dug. And many of the stages also have a hidden sprite that's a sprite of a character from different Namco arcade games hidden throughout them. Which is kind of why the description on the eShop says a full cast of classic Namco arcade characters. That's what really turns me on about Tinkle Pit. Apart from the hilarious name. The bosses in this game are very difficult. So, that does make the game kind of annoying to play through, the bosses. Though the game does give you an instantaneous respawn for losing stocks, instead of like a checkpoint or whatever. So if you have a lot of stocks, you can just keep going on the same stage, at the cost of points at the end. And it's a bigger bragging right if you can get a perfect with the item collections, where you get the metamorphosized items. All 8 of the metamorphosized items within every stage of a world, which shows up on your score on the leaderboard. So, I like Tinkle Pit. Tinkle Pit's a pretty cool game. I'd say it's worthy of a B for me. And the final game that's in the base tier list that the original creator made is Pac-Man Arrangement 1996 from the Namco Classic Collection arcade cabinets. The only reason I can still play this game on the Switch is because of Pac-Man Museum Plus. I really want the Namco Classic Collection games to come to the Switch on Arcade Archives. Because then I'd be able to play the Galaga and Dig Dug arrangements again. Plus, I could play Mappy and Xevious on one, and Rally X on the other. So, it'd be nice. They could sell them for $15 instead of $8, like they're doing with Zinger Z, which is actually by Band Presto. Just a suggestion. Pac-Man Arrangement is a really cool Pac-Man game. It's hard, though it's really cool. You know, you got unique stages with the kinky ghost that corrupts the other ghosts to mutate them and make them more intimidating. And various power-ups that can turn the game into your favor if you luck out with some of them. It's got a cool final boss. And while the game is definitely tough to one credit clear and get the optimum point bonus, you do have the continue option, which allows you to continue instantaneously. So if you were a casual that didn't care about your score, you could still definitely beat the game with the continue feature. So, you know. Pac-Man Arrangement is a neat arcade game. I do prefer the PlayStation Portable Pac-Man Arrangement because it's more fair and fun, and I can one credit clear it on normal on command, as can some of you people, I'm sure. Though the arcade Pac-Man Arrangement is still cool. Alright, I I added some other arcade games so that I can include every arcade game by Namco I have ever properly played. Because not all of them were on this list before. So, yeah, we'll go over those as well. Assaults. Very interesting that the person that made this list forgot Assault and included all the other Namco games that were in Namco Museum compilations. I'm talking about Volume 4 for this one. Although, I guess that could be said about Sky Kid Deluxe as well. Assault is a warfare game where you operate a tank on a distant planet that people from Earth migrated to after finding about its existence. And the people of Earth conflicted with their beliefs over the people of the native planet, enough so that the planet would have its first ever war. And you, the player, are of the native planet's army fighting against Earth, which is super hilarious. And it totally makes sense for how people in this world are in real life, also, believe me. I'm not like one of those people, though. I know some people are. Alright. So in Assault, you control a tank. You have grip controllers, one for each tread. You hold both to go forward. You hold one forward and back to turn, back to go reverse. Then you tilt to the side to do barrel rolls, and then away from each other to do a wheelie, and then you can shoot grenades from the wheelie. It's a very maneuverable tank that can dodge bullets if your reaction and coordinations are good. What makes Assault difficult among its 11 stages is that the enemies can attack you even while they're off-screen. And while there is a limited number of enemies in every stage, it seems like they're unlimited. And some of the stages are about impossible to beat without losing any lives. Although if you lose a life, it's instantaneous respawn, so it's not all unfair. I do like the concept of Assault a lot, basically. What you need to do to beat the game is to destroy the turrets. And there are some enemies that are super sturdy and seem impossible to destroy unless you auto-fire on them. So, you know. I do think Assault is a cool game. It'd be enough for me to put it in B, even though the game's difficulty does get me to the extent that it causes me anger on, like Stage 9 and even Stage, 7. I think it was. Though I think it'll be a B. Forgive me for the bad image sizing on most of these. That couldn't be helped. Blastoff. Blastoff is a sequel to Bosconian, as I explained in one of my more recent videos. Though while it is a sequel, the game does play very differently. It's a shoot-'em-up game like Xevious or Philios, where you have 8-directional movement with your ship instead of moving around a wraparound zone with the radar. As your ship approaches the enemy bases to infiltrate and destroy them from the inside. Throughout the game, you rotate between 4 different blasters, which you can use to your advantage, which is a really neat concept. It allows you to hit enemies at the side a bit, and from behind if you wanted. It's a really nice touch. You go through a space scene with obstacles, then you attack the front of the base to infiltrate it. Then you go through a up-close perspective with more limited movement as you raid the base's interior and attack enemies there, until you get to the reactor core, which you must destroy while dodging hard to avoid bullets, to destroy the bases, with 6 bases in total. Super straightforward, the game's really fun, it's not that hard, though it does require you to memorize the placement of all, as games go, so. Blastoff, for me, you know what, I really love Blastoff. Blastoff is a fantastic game. I'm putting it in S. since I had Bosconian in A. I'm really glad I got a chance to play Blast Off. That was well worth the wait to play, in my opinion. Chozetsuringen Bravo Man. Bravo Man is a game about a half-robotic superhero. He's a businessman that gets turned into a robotic superhero by some force that calls upon him to fight against Dr. Bomb, the antagonist of the game, along with his army of mutants and robots that he has himself. It's an action game where you run and jump while using extender attacks to hit enemies. This game is extraordinarily difficult, one of the hardest Namco games to beat on one credit legitimately, because the jumping and attacking commands are velocity sensitive depending on if you tap or hold the buttons for them, and that results in a bit of lag for the input, making it harder to aim your hits on enemies and to jump, and it's extremely easy to take damage throughout the playthrough. Even in the underwater shoot-'em-up scenes where he becomes like a robotic fish and is more of a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up, it can be very difficult to avoid enemy attacks since your forward maximum distance is limited. At least in the arcade version. It doesn't seem to be like that in the PC Engine version, which is even shorter, so whatever. Because of that, I just play through the game while taking damage and using the temporary invincibility from continues, instead of even bothering to try the buffer out of not taking any damage. So, it's not a very fair game in my opinion. It's really not that great, so I'm playing this game in D for that reason. It definitely could have been better. Dangerous Seed. Another one of those spatial shoot-'em-up games. In Dangerous Seed, there's this combo ship that splits into 3 as it tries to escape these enemy tubes, which are infested with space bugs, basically. And you fight your way through them, and you have to fight a boss at the end. You can destroy them or let them escape. Destroying them obviously gets you more points. Then whichever one of your ships are surviving will affect your combo ship at the end for the later half of the game, where you go through space and go up against different enemies there as well. There are actually different stages in the space scene for whether you destroy the bosses or let them escape. And if you let them escape, I'm pretty sure the final boss will be a lot harder. While you do have hit points instead of dying on contact with a bullet, the game is actually very difficult. You know, the enemies can ambush you easily with their shots, and it's very difficult to survive a legit playthrough of the game, and in my opinion, it's not very fun. I can't blame this game's long play on my playlist for not getting many views at all, so I'm not a huge fan of Dangerous Seed. It's definitely going to be another D for me. So, deal with it. Dig Dug Arrangement Arcade, which I've only played because of that one specific Namco Museum compilation. I think you know what I'm talking about. That was where I first played the Pac-Man arrangement as well. Like Pac-Man arrangement, Dig Dug Arrangement is a fantastic remix of an arcade legend that was really fun to play, even with the use of continues. It has some references to other arcade games as well, like the Cosmo game series, which was a pretty nice touch. The boss Puka and Figar are a nice touch as well. Power-ups, music, stage design. You know, it's a fantastic game, and I really want a chance to be able to play this properly again, so. hopefully one day that can happen. Emeraldia. This is a puzzle game that's somewhat along the lines of Cosmo Game the Puzzle, with a little bit of difference in how the game really plays. In Emeraldia, you rotate falling cubes in the same formation as that of Cosmo Game the Puzzle, and that you have to align them so that they are matching colors in directly touching positions, even diagonally. Then you crush them with one. You damage them with one strike of the same color on top, and then destroy them with another impact of a cube of the same color. It's definitely not an easy puzzle game to understand at first, and you can clutter up into failure really quickly if you're unfamiliar with how to really play the game. And the adventure mode in the game is absolutely ridiculous to play through. I'm mainly talking about the later stages. That escape stage that you have to do after you beat Jameer, the final boss, that took me more than an hour on end to do in the base recording for the long play. And I wouldn't care to try and do that ever again. So, you know. I think what saves Emeraldia is the setting, being an ocean game, and the characters. Mint, the dolphin, is adorable, as are some of the other ocean characters in the game. So that kind of saves it in a way. And occasionally I'll play the game in its puzzle mode on the easy difficulty just to progress high enough and get a game over. So, it's definitely not a very fair game, though. And it's definitely not a very fair game at all, though. And I think it's definitely worthy of a spot in the D tier for that reason. So, yeah. Xvania. Xvania is a combat game. It's not a fighting game. It's just a general combat game about 4 warriors that are going on a quest to save Princess Electra from the demon Uranus. And they fight each other in order to fight their way through castles to decimate them. Throughout the game, whichever character you control, you open chests to find various items and collect them to use them to your advantage. Although you can use whips to push enemies back and break the chests open, you actually have to use electric orbs in order to destroy the enemies. And it can be difficult to determine where to actually place the orbs to corner your enemies and destroy them throughout the game, especially in the later stages. And then the third stage of every castle is a dragon room, which in the third castle and onwards, the dragon will blow fire and attack you and the enemies, so you gotta watch out for that as well. I'd say Xvania would probably be a game that would be better to play with friends in multiplayer, so, you know. If I'm buffering, though, it's still a pretty decent game to play through, so. I think Xvania is a pretty cool concept. I'd say it's worthy of a B. I realized there was a game that I forgot, so. Alright. Galaga Arrangement Arcade. Same as with the Pac-Man and Dig Dug arrangements, Galaga Arrangement is a fantastic remix of an arcade legend that pretty much speaks for itself. Music, stage design, enemies, boss at the end, special bonuses if you're a master player. Galaga Arrangement's awesome. Although, like Pac-Man, I do prefer the PlayStation Portable arrangements for Dig Dug and Galaga, which I played originally on the Xbox 360 Virtual Arcade. And it sucks to know that on the Switch I can only play the Pac-Man ones. So, you know. I still have a place in my heart for the Dig Dug and Gallagher arrangements, for sure. Knuckleheads, the only fighting game that'll be ranked in this video. Knuckleheads is an actual fighting game that Namco made before Tekken. There are 6 different playable characters in Knuckleheads. You can keep the button held to charge up an attack and release it to do more powerful moves. There are some special inputs that you can read about in arcade archives by using the manual feature of the game. The game is very difficult as fighting games go, so you really have to get coordinated and memorize movement options to do good in Knuckleheads. You know. I like how the final stage in Knuckleheads, if you play in solo, is a gold version of the character you play as with improved stats, so the odds are against you. So, you know, Knuckleheads is a pretty cool concept for an early fighting game by Namco, a company that's pretty iconic for its fighting games. So to know that it got a game like that before its iconic Tekken series is pretty interesting to know of, so. Skill issues, deduct points, it's going to go into the C tier. Mirai Ninja is going to be another F. Because, while the game seems fair and fun to play at first, there is one part about it that deducts from all fun of playing the game. So, Mirai Ninja is a game about a cybernetic futuristic ninja, because Mirai means future in Japanese, as you might know about the Pokemon Miraidon. So, Mirai Ninja, future ninja, that's going out to fight against evil cyborg forces. The character moves very fast and can jump, and you can shoot very fast with the shuriken. You can shoot even faster, like ballistic, if you use an auto-fire key, may I add. So, you know. And you have hit points, which recover a bit at the end of every stage. Now, while the game might not look that hard to play through at first, there is one stage near the end of the game, that haunted Japanese castle, that detracts from the fun so much that it goes into the F tier. That one Japanese castle stage near the end of the game, you have to memorize exactly what route you go in with the pitfalls, and know what ones to take and what not to take, with the penalty for choosing incorrectly being zapped to the beginning of that stage. And do you have any idea how complicated it is to navigate that without looking up any help? Plus, the torches themselves also damage you, and you get cornered with enemies easily. And if you use a continue after game over, you go back to the stage's beginning. It's not like a checkpoint system. So, you know, that was a game I was reluctant to play at first, and I was right to be reluctant about playing it. So, yeah. That's not a game I care to play ever again for that reason. I'm sorry. Pistol Daimyo no Boken, which is a spin-off of Bravo Man. One of the bosses in Bravo Man is called the Pistol Shogun. And he's a funny-looking guy that floats in the air with Japanese flag fans and has a cannon attached to his head, which is hilarious. He even has a personality, weeping after you beat him. And I'm guessing the people that made Bravo Man thought Pistol Lord should have his own game, so they made Pistol Daimyo no Boken. It's a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up game with humorous concepts, though the game is very difficult, especially without auto-firing at all. I often play the game with auto-fire keys for medium bullets, because that makes some stages a bit easier. The bosses are pretty humorous, the normal enemies are humorous as well. I'm pretty sure the game would be funnier if you knew the Japanese language, and actually understood what the characters were saying. So, you know, I like Pistol Daimyo no Boken a lot for its concept. It's funny, it's pretty fun, though pretty tough. So, it's another B tier for me, I'd say. Pro Tennis World Court, which is a generic sports game. It's just a somewhat realistic tennis game. You know, apart from maybe Wii Tennis, tennis games are not easy to play by any means, like traditionally, because you have to take into account the actual rules for tennis games. And there are also an array of different characters that you can play as and against in that game. And to do it in this game basically requires trial and error. Because some characters are faster than others, and if you're using the slow character, it can be about impossible to keep up with the ball at all. So, that kind of hurts Pro Tennis World Court for that reason. And a lot of people aren't into sports games in general, so. What more do I have to say? It's pretty lame for that reason. And the final game that I have to rank is Sky Kid Deluxe. Sky Kid Deluxe is a kind of sequel of Sky Kid that it got like a month later, just going into 1986. And Sky Kid Deluxe does have some graphical and technical improvements compared to Sky Kid Original, and that some of the stages have some new elements with secrets as well as hazards. And there are also bonus stages that take place in like the ice caps and have a unique kind of base scene within them. It's essentially Sky Kid with updated music and graphics and with additional content stages. And it's really not special at all compared to the original Sky Kid, so I'm not sure why this needed to exist, really. Alright, so a little overview of what I have on my list. My favorite games by Namco so far are Galaga 88, Super Pac-Man, Tank Force, Mappy, Motos, Dragon Spirit, Oradyne, and Blast Off. I really love all of these games in the A tier. The games I have in the B tier are good. The games I have in the C tier are kind of meh. The ones in the D tier are not great. And in F, you know, those games are garbage. I will play at least some of these games if I ever get an opportunity to do so. I also want to point out that there are some games by Namco that came to arcade archives that didn't get localized outside of Japan, even on arcade archives, so I can't properly play them. Just so you know, though, those games are Marvel Land, Finest Hour, Face Off, and Fighter and Attacker. Fighter and Attacker, or FNA, is another kind of warfare game and a shoot 'em up, and is a little bit more realistic than the other ones by Namco, which is likely why it was banned overseas. Face Off is a generic hockey game. Finest Hour looks a bit too complex to really understand how to really play outside Japan. And Marvel Land, you know, I'm not sure why those games didn't come overseas. If any of you guys know, you can tell me if you want, so I understand a bit better. And if I had to rank the Namco games with Namco Museum Archives, most of the games NES ports would go into F, because the NES versions of the arcade games are nowhere near as fun to play as the arcade versions. In Galaga, the enemies drop out of the formation too low and are very easy to run into as they do so, making it hard to progress in that version of the game. In Galaxian, the aliens are smarter to move. In Dig Dug, the enemies deflate a lot faster, making it impossible to survive later stages, compared to the arcade version. In the NES version of Rolling Thunder, the grunts with guns shoot as soon as you come to their site, which make that game a nightmare to play through. along with the fact that there are some stages you have to jump precisely or you die. And, the NES versions of almost all of the arcade games are awful, in my opinion. I'd say Dragon Spirit, the new legend, would probably be around the range of a B, especially if I played it more. Splatterhouse 1 Pocket Graffiti would actually be an A. I am liking that game a lot more the more I play it. I do like Splatterhouse's prequel. It's pretty good. So, yeah. Maybe later on I'll try out The Adventure of Valkyrie or Starluster, though I'm probably not going to like those as much as well. So, I'd say Mappy Land would probably be around a B or a C for me as well, if I were to throw that in. And yeah, that'd be how I would rank most of the NES games that I've gotten to play. Alright, so with that wraps up this video. I do play a lot of Namco arcades, so I'll come out with more as more of these come to Arcade Archives. And we'll maybe update this tier list in another year if it gets significant enough. So, And I plan to do other stuff besides just Namco Arcade on my channel as well. As an artist, I would like to share my hobby art with YouTube and maybe try out some other games to play as well. So, I got a lot in mind, so if you want to give me a chance, you can consider doing so. Alright, so that's going to be it for this video. I am Crolister, the Master of Ponage. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in my next upload. Bye.